Hi, David here, and welcome back to the channel, where we're looking at life in spirit and people's experiences after they die through the automatic writings of the early 20th century medium, James Padgett. In this second series of messages, we're looking at messages received by James Padgett from friends and acquaintances in spirit, recalling the circumstances of their passing to spirit and sharing what they have learned since passing over. In today's video, we're going to look at a message James received from a former patient of his friend, Dr. Leslie Stone. This message was written through James on May 16, 1918. The name of the person in spirit communicating is Charles Wilson, and this message is interesting because Charles suffered from a form of mental disability or illness. And as we'll see, this has had an effect on what Charles was able to recall of his earthly life. Because he's not known to James Padgett, Charles begins by introducing himself to James, saying, "I am here, Charles T. Wilson. Let me write a few lines. I am the friend of Dr. Stone, and knew him some years ago when he was living in Buffalo, New York. I was in a hospital where he was engaged in looking after daffy mortals, such as I was." At this point, James seems to ask Charles why he calls himself Daffy, or why he was in hospital, possibly just to get additional information that will enable Leslie Stone to recall Charles's case. Charles explains, "Well, in those days my mind and my brain did not coordinate, and after I passed into the spirit life, I found that I had a mind which enabled me to understand things as I did before I had the awful blank mind come to me, which resulted in my being incarcerated in the hospital." So Charles is distinguishing between mind and brain. They are not the same. Also, Charles tells us that when he passes to spirit and sheds his physical form, his mind becomes clear again, now that it is no longer trying to perceive through a physical brain that did not function properly. Charles recovers the clear, aware state of mind that he enjoyed earlier in life, before he suffered the condition or illness that resulted in him being hospitalized. So he has clearly enjoyed a time in his life when he was of sound mind, as they say. For Charles, passing to spirit is both a physical and a mental release, which allows him to recover himself. He continues, "What a wonderful experience I had after I became liberated from the imprisonment of my mind in a diseased brain. Then everything appeared to me as if I were a new creature, and the happiness which came to me, the happiness which came from my liberated mind, is beyond what you may conceive of. I can suppose that men think that those whose minds are thus blotted out, as it were, by a brain which has ceased to perform its functions, must not be unhappy, because they know not the loss of the benefits that a mind with a sound brain affords. But in this supposition men are mistaken, for while the person thus afflicted may not know of what sound-minded men call real trouble and worry, yet they have troubles which belong to their diseased brains, and to them these troubles are just as real as are the troubles of those who think that they are sane." Now, that's a hugely important point. When someone suffers from a condition that affects the proper functioning of the brain, whether some form of dementia or other illness, it can be tempting, or possibly even comforting, for other people to assume that if someone is out of it altogether, as is sometimes said, they are going to be in a placid or peaceful state, not knowing what has happened to them, and not having to cope with the various stresses that life in this world tends to bring with it. Charles Wilson tells us very clearly that we are wrong to make that assumption, because a brain that is not functioning properly, as most of us would see it, is nevertheless still creating a psychic reality in which the person inhabiting that body has to live. A brain that is not in a state of ease, which is diseased, may give rise to worries that do not have the kind of objective reality that the rest of us would ascribe to our worries over paying rent, utility bills, and so on. But they are real enough for the person who has to cope with them. Charles continues, "Of course, while I was in the flesh, I did not fully understand just what my condition of mind was, and many of my vagaries were of such a character as to cause me apparent happiness, while, on the other hand, others caused me real suffering. Things of great importance appeared to me with a force that no real existence could surpass." We've seen in other videos that the thoughts we choose to have are not just real in the sense that they create the psychic reality we live within, but that they do have an objective reality that shapes us, which people in spirit can perceive, and which creates a kind of legacy reality that we take with us when we pass to spirit. We are conscious of the good or bad spiritual and moral qualities of our thoughts and deeds, and we benefit or suffer accordingly. Fair enough. Is this also true of the thoughts of people who are not of sound mind, and arguably not responsible for their thoughts? This is where Charles's message gets really interesting. He tells James that shortly after I passed to the spirit life, these imaginations left me, and with them disappeared the unhappiness which they caused. And it seemed to me as if my mind had been freed from a great burden. I became so conscious of the fact that it seemed as if I must be in heaven or some other place of bliss, but it meant nothing more than my mind finding its real condition, and the recollections of my earth life came to me with all their consequences. Okay, so far so familiar, but, says Charles, strange as it may seem to you, there were no recollections of anything that happened while I was in the state of mental darkness. The only things that came to my remembrance were parts of my life before my affliction, and only these brought with them a knowledge of good or evil deeds which I had committed. So there's our answer. If the thoughts a person has had were the product of a brain that was malfunctioning, rather than being the product of the soul trying to function through that brain, the soul does not bear moral or spiritual responsibility for those thoughts. I have to say, that is exactly the answer I would be hoping for anyone who has been in that situation. Charles continues, "Since then, I have realized the workings of the laws which controlled my acts of life, and I was happy, or otherwise, as these laws called for my suffering, or if they failed to operate." When Charles talks of the law of compensation as having failed to operate, it's not that the law isn't working, it's just that there will be many things in our life that don't make it kick in. Much of life can be taken up with activities or thoughts that don't have a clear cost or benefit in spiritual terms. But as Charles told us, there was a time in his life when his brain was functioning, when his thoughts and other actions did reflect the soul inhabiting that body, and for these he bears responsibility. So that after his initial relief upon passing to spirit, there are things he has had to come to terms with. He tells James that I have been in the dark plains ever since, though I have made some progress towards the light, or rather, the darkness has grown less intense and my sufferings have decreased. My mind has always been alert and nothing has escaped me, which was a part of my sane existence while on earth. I wish that I could find a way to get rid of this darkness and suffering, and as only a few nights ago I heard that you could help spirits in my condition, I determined to seek your help. And tonight, when I saw the doctor with you, I thought it a good opportunity to ask your help. So not only has Charles seen the activity around James Padgett, he has also seen that Leslie Stone, his old physician, is present, and so has asked for help again. Probably what has happened next is that James Padgett has said to Charles Wilson to look around and see if any of James's spirit band are making themselves known to him. James's own father forms one of the members of that band. And the next thing Charles writes is, your father says that he will help me. And as he is so very beautiful and bright, I can easily believe that he can, and I am going with him. So I thank you. I was Charles T. Wilson and was called Wash. So Charles even gives his nickname from his earthly life. I think this is a fascinating message, and although I've read it before, creating the script for this video has brought out things I haven't noticed before. And it shows us once again why messages from people who have struggled spiritually can also be enlightening and have their part to play in showing us why messages from more elevated people in spirit matter so much. Taking a direct path towards God can feel like a bit of a challenge, or too much to expect. But if we are also shown the difficulties we can avoid if we take it, we come to see that it is, in truth, the easier way forward. The next video in this midweek series, I'll take you through a message to James from a man in spirit who wrote through him in June 1918 and who just goes by the name of Spencer. Spencer's message contains some interesting comments on the spiritualist movement and the role of public demonstrations of mediumship as seen from spirit. The next video in the Divine Love series will be video 1019 this coming Sunday, where we'll be looking at a message from the Apostle Matthew given on November 2, 1915. It's an interesting message which sets out Matthew's thoughts on the relationship between the individual soul and God, and how it is that we can become conscious of our personal immortality when we share in divine love. So I hope you'll find time to join me for one or other of those. As always, if you've enjoyed this video, please do take a moment to like and subscribe if you haven't already. It does help to introduce the material to others. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care until then. Bye-bye.